If you take a moment to look at your tables, you might start to wonder why there are some sludge and slime-based props at your table. And you're welcome to partake of those during the session. Just do not eat them. They're not edible. But I want to introduce you today to this idea of sludge. You may not know it, but this is something that's costing your organization millions of dollars, and it's something your staff and your patients find themselves trapped in. Let's take a look at this video.
All over the world, sludge is an obstacle to freedom. Sludge consists of frictions that separate us from something we want. When there's waiting time, paperwork requirements, some confusing process that you can't navigate, that's sludge. It's like a kind of gooey, viscous substance in which your feet are stuck and you can't get out. And it's not merely frustrating, it's treating you without dignity. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Sludge reduction can produce big dividends. My name is Cass Sunstein. I teach at Harvard Law School. I have a new book. It's called Sludge, and it's about what makes it hard for us to get where we're trying to go. Sludge can be good when it is ensuring that people aren't reckless or impulsive. For example, if you need to get a driver's license, you will encounter some sludge. It's justified. You shouldn't get a driver's license just because you want one. It's a matter of health and safety. Sometimes you might have to wait for weeks or months to get a test, sludge. And you might find in a hospital, for example, that nurses are spending 10 hours a week entering things into forms. That's sludge. Our lives depend on our capacity to navigate something. And when we can't, frequently because sludge stands in our way, we're lost in a world of just fog and diminishment.
Now, we were inspired by Cass's work, but we have taken it further to apply it to our everyday work in healthcare. Because if there's any industry that's drowning in sludge, it's ours. So let's talk about documentation sludge in hospitals. It's the procedures, checklists, approvals, paperwork, sign-offs, verifications, audits, reports, forms, logs, everything that has added up and up and up over the years to create this enormous documentation sludge. And why is it there? Some of it serves a very legitimate purpose. As Cass said, is justified sludge. You need it for quality and safety reasons. There's important clinical needs. There's really important clinical checklists and protocols we have to follow. This is good sludge, like Cass says. It's friction that's needed that ensures patient safety, prevents recklessness. But here's what's happening for the majority of the sludge. Why has this accumulated over time? There's regulatory requirements that have never sunset. New rules keep getting added. Old rules stay on the books. Oftentimes, it's left to an individual's interpretation of what is actually needed. There's a fear of litigation that creates this defensive documentation. Document everything has become the mantra, not because it helps the patient, because we're terrified of the lawsuit. We know insurance companies, there's probably some eye rolls over here when I say that, of insurance companies continuing to multiply the demand. And every single payer wants something different that adds on over time. Technology didn't always help. When we digitized a lot of the work, unfortunately, we automated a lot of bad processes that ended up with more steps, sometimes more clicks. And then there's the workflow and the processes from the paper era that have just stayed on. We never really asked whether we should be doing this at all. So that has just accumulated over years and years, layer upon layer upon layer, until we're sort of drowning in it right now. So what is the impact of this? The sludge tax. What is the tax you're paying on all this sludge? Firstly, it's an enormous time tax. But more than that, it taxes human dignity. When we make our nurses spend time in endless documentation requirements, when we make our patients wait in administrative purgatory, we're saying your time doesn't matter. We're saying you don't count. It causes moral injury. Healthcare workers, all of you included, didn't get into this profession to fill out endless forms. right? It gets in the way of their purpose, of their passion, of their mission. It degrades the care relationship when we're dragging our patients through the sludge as well. It creates learned helplessness. We become so used to these frictions that we often can't see them at all. And I would say the worst of all is that it normalizes absurdity. We all sort of shrug our shoulders and just accept that this is how healthcare is. So, what are we, all of us in the room, what are we going to do about it? We think it's time for all of us to get into the business of sludge busting. And if you're so inclined and you're committed to this after the session, there's stickers for you to take home to put in your laptop or your fridge to ensure your commitment to this. But truly, what are we going to do? Today, we want to launch a bold and ambitious challenge. We want to challenge the industry, health systems across the country, to sign up for a challenge to collectively unlock 100 million hours trapped in this documentation sludge by 2030. And yes, this is a big number. It'll require many health systems to sign up. In the next 4 years, we've run the math. We think it's absolutely doable. And just think about the impact that will have to your staff, to your patients. And what this means for you as a $2 billion system you're trying to calibrate for your system size, this means we're going to try to eliminate 500,000 hours of documentation annually, which frees up 250 FTE worth of workforce time spent in sludge work, which will unlock 30 million in annual administrative work, the sludge tax. So you can calibrate based on your system size what this could look like. And yes, these are numbers around cost savings and efficiency, but fundamentally, we're going to also restore dignity to the healthcare work. We're going to say to our clinicians that your time matters, to our patients that you count. We're going to say to our staff that your work should be meaningful. How will we do this? By now, you have either experienced firsthand or at least have heard about our Nexus collaboratives. So we're designing a Nexus collaborative that will help you fast track your work on this challenge. What will we do in this Nexus collaborative? As you know, by now it's 8 to 12 health systems committed to this journey together. First, we'll do a sludge audit. We're going to look at where the sludge is in your organization across clinical documentation, administrative, compliance. How bad is it? Where is it really stuck? What's a necessary justified sludge and what's the really bad sludge we need to address? And really importantly, what's the sludge tax? How much time is being spent on it? What is the burnout impact? What is the impact to your patients? Because it's important we start with that. We need to see it, we need to name it, we need to measure it. Second, we'll triage and diagnose the sludge. We'll say, okay, what's necessary? It's justified, it's appropriately designed. We're going to keep it. 2, we hope to eliminate some of this documentation. There's a lot exists that people don't know why we do anymore. Doesn't serve any purpose anymore. 3, there's a lot of opportunity to automate. This goes beyond ambient documentation. We're thinking a whole range of technologies to deploy here, from agentic, robotics, basic automation as well. And then finally, we do believe there's a lot of work to redesign, streamline, simplify work that's needed, but is disproportionately burdensome. And then finally, like any Nexus, we want to give you an actionable, scalable sludge busting plan. We'll work with you to create these plans, short-term wins, driving to long-term transformations. And you'll be part of a cohort like you are in Nexuses right now. There's several of you in a collaborative already. You're learning with and from other health systems tackling this challenge. There'll be an executive track focused on executives who really need to think about redesigning operations and the future of work, and then operational tracks, getting to the brass tacks of the audit, the diagnosis, and the plan. And through the Nexus, you'll also have the tools, the templates, the frameworks, the community to do this together. Now, in the coming months, you'll hear a lot about this from us, both on the challenge, how could you get in on the pledge to join this challenge, both for health systems as well as technology partners, as well as what the nexus will be. But for now, for today, we just need you to start with seeing and recognizing the sludge. To recognize that the friction we have accepted as inevitable may actually be a choice. To stop normalizing the absurdity. But don't just take my word for it. I want to give you a behind-the-scenes look at how we came up with this vision and challenge. This work has been informed by a council of COOs and CFOs. They've been in your shoes. They know the pressures you're facing. They have lived with the sludge, and they're ready to do something about it. And with that, I'll welcome Clay, Richa, and Joe to the stage.
Thank you, Sonia. I hope that this concept of sludge and this way of framing some of the issues that are before us is as motivating to you as it is to us. You know, we certainly didn't begin here, though. So beginning with the end in mind, the sludge challenge, we want to take you back through the process and the testing and the learning that got us here. So first, let me introduce our guests and my co-chairs in this effort. Richa Gupta was the former COO of the Rush Medical Group here in Chicago. She's a physician by training. She also did work in surgical services, quality, and performance improvement at both Rush and at Northwestern. Richa has recently started a position with Ambience, but she's not representing that perspective today. She's here today as an experienced health system operator and clinician. Richa, welcome. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your background or how you came to know AVIA?
Absolutely. Yeah. Nothing else to add on the background. Thanks for that great introduction. How I got to know about AVIA was that AVIA is kind of part of the fabric and Rush. And we were part of the founding groups that were interested in supporting and supported by the work in AVIA. So at Rush, it was sort of a household thing for us, really. And it was really a pleasure and an honor to be part of AVIA's journey over the last decade or so in my various roles as Chief Quality Officer first and then the CEO of the medical group, being part of the various avatars that we saw AVIA evolve into. And then most recently, right, probably in the 5 years or so before I left Rush, we engaged AVIA, specifically Sonia, for her insights to really launch the digital journey and develop a very specific roadmap that was actionable. And it's great to see that even since I've left, that then Paul and team have continued that work. So it's a lasting impact in my mind.
It's great to have you here, Richa. And Joe Muscola is also a former AVIA member and recently EVP of System Operations for Northwell. He previously held positions with Northwell over enterprise transformation, a $1 billion ambulatory network, and the role of Chief People Officer. He's a PA, a cardiothoracic physician's assistant by training and background. And we're glad to have you here. Joe, same question. What else would you expand on about your background and your relationship with AVIA?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. Great to be up here with both you, Clay, and Richa, part of this COO, CFO Council. Big shout out to Sonia, who kept us on target and on task to create this incredible campaign, which you're going to hear a lot more about. You know, so being on multiple sides of the spectrum, having been at the bedside, having been in the sort of the face of for Northwell, 100,000 team members and trying to advance various initiatives, change management, et cetera, I've been privileged to see where things get stuck and sometimes why things go so fast doesn't always make sense. And so having the ability to then sort of create our digital transformation strategy and then ultimately lead those efforts has been really one of the pride points of my career. That is where we had the opportunity to interact with AVIA. We were taking on a lot of things at Northwell. One, an EHR conversion. I know a number of other folks are working through that as we speak. 2, we were going through a cloud migration. We had a lot of on-prem services and applications more so, and moving our work to the cloud so our data could be more accessible, more protected. And then the last part was a CRM strategy. Problem was, having taken on so much of this, we sort of like forgot our digital front door. I say forgot in air quotes. We don't forget. It was just like, do we have the bandwidth? and how do we actually make the best and smartest use of our time. That's where we brought in the folks from AVIA to calibrate and then also collaborate.
You've learned the C's. I'm impressed.
Courtesy Neil, thank you so much, to really help us better create that strategic roadmap, that digital architecture. And I think for anyone who's a CIO, CTO, CDO, whatever other initials we decide to put into a technology role, the most difficult thing coming ahead of us is the tsunami of requests for all the various agentic workforce. Let's just take Oracle as a quick example, and then I'll shut up. Oracle today, some of you may use them as your ERP, has over 500 different agentic workforce agents. So how do you decide which are more valuable than any other startup idea or any other major platform? And so valuing these items and coming along with partners who've done really the heavy lifting on those is where AVIA comes in.
Yeah, we've really enjoyed some great work with both systems. Let's take you back through the day. I told you at the beginning of the day that it's very important as I lead AVIA that we are grounded in applied transformation. And we have all been a part in your health systems and at AVIA of putting out a grand vision and having it fall flat. So Sonia and I reached out and tapped Joe and Richa and said, would you co-chair and help recruit a group of COOs and CFOs to help test our thinking? And what a group they pulled together. And so on the screen behind us is the council that was pulled together largely through Joe's and Richa's and my network. And in addition to the three of us, this is the group that really tested the concepts. Now, if I take you back to the beginning of the day and you remember our provocateur, Eric, and you remember he started with ludicrous, right? And just the cascade of processes that are ripe for improvement and waste elimination. And we had this idea, the labor addiction, right? We had this idea that we needed to challenge health systems to go beyond just thinking about one approach, one technology, the agentic, right? And go into how do we use the full suite of transformational approaches to approach being an autonomous enterprise, to break the labor addiction and to move away from marginal 2% improvement and to commit to 5 areas where you were going to make a 25 to 35% improvement in manpower. Okay, so that was our going in hypothesis. I'll begin with the end in mind. It fell flat. So here were some of my early observations as we pulled this group together. They met with us, by the way, for several workshops, and they were phenomenal. And we compensated them zero. And so it was their commitment to the industry, their commitment to transformation, their desire to learn from each other and hear from each other, and frankly, their respect for Richa and Joe, who recruited them, that brought them to the table. But I was surprised. They bristled against the term autonomous enterprise. They completely met with skepticism the idea of a 25%, let alone 35% improvement in any process over time. They are a very conservative group. They'd heard grand claims before that didn't pan out. They had implemented expensive technologies that didn't solve the problem. I wanted to ask a couple of times, like, who hurt you? Like, what? Then I realized I'm one of you. I got it. But that was my initial observations. Richa, what were your observations as the council came together?
Yeah, thank you, Clay. I think you just reminded me of the trauma of how quickly we were let down, actually, with our great ambitions. Not true. It was, we really went in very ambitious, and we challenged ourselves. We spent hours and weeks on this work and really going in, we challenged ourselves, should be 10%, should be 20%. No, it should be 40%, right? And we went in there and we really felt beat down pretty quickly. But, the question is why? And I heard something at the agentic session today, and it reminded me of why. It's a framework that I've heard before. The challenge here is everything that it takes to run the system and transform the system. And there are just so many fires on all of your plates today that it's really hard to think about how you go from where we are today with the fragmented systems, with technology showing a line of sight to something that they're promising, but not necessarily scalable, to autonomous enterprise. That was sort of, one level of takeaway. But all in all, I think everyone agreed that, to no surprise for any of us, that the pressures, the margin pressure was probably one of the biggest drivers. The staffing challenges within, in terms of not just the inability to fill positions, the vacancies, the gap, the unionization risk, all the way up to positions, which has been a real challenge in a number of regions, was something that was just top of mind for these leaders. That was, making them a little more conservative, so to say. And on the one hand, they had the appetite to take on a lot and say things like, we don't want to do pilots anymore. We want to be able to scale. We really want to be able to build up an enterprise from scratch and have the people, process, technology to be able to support that. And on the other hand, what we gleaned really at the end of it is that there really wasn't an appetite to be a first mover on this across the board, but there certainly was a lot of appetite to be a fast follower. So that in a way felt promising and kept us going to the point that we eventually got to. But just really great discussion and honest discussion, I would say, which was eye-opening and grounding on a number of fronts.
Joe, what else am I?
Yeah, and so to build on Richard's comments, there's a couple of fascinating things that we heard or observed. And the first is, and I don't believe we have any health system CEOs in here, and if I'm wrong, Clay will quickly correct me, or the CEO in the audience can correct me. The point is, can you name me a CEO in this entire country who has really leaned in, healthcare, health provider, who has really leaned into the notion of artificial intelligence? Let's just start there. We won't even go to autonomous. Probably not. Why? I'll share this additional anecdote. I had dinner a week ago with a CEO and a CFO, to be unnamed. And this is a CEO who I think has leaned into the notion of artificial intelligence more than most. And the first thing he said to me was, listen, I love where we're going with this and there's so much opportunity, but if I go too far out, everybody's going to start saying that we're eliminating jobs. I'm going to have the union come after me on this. And so I asked this question. Do you think that Amazon doesn't have the same issues? Amazon's getting organized in states left and right, more so in New York, and that's the prism through which I view the world. But they came out just a few weeks ago saying that they're going to eliminate 600,000 jobs because of some of the robotics that Eric just spoke about earlier today. And so what if we jumped the line? What if we said, hey, this is about saving time and effort, not about your job, but putting the joy back, and I'm sure there'll be more to say about that, in why we actually got into this space in the first place. Just imagine the efficiency that could be created. Where we find ourselves with this group, and I would say with the CEOs, stuck a little bit, is looking beyond what is to what can be, and that's the opportunity that exists. When we also asked this group, no one to be named, and so I'll also pose the question to this group, how many of you use some form of chat or generative AI, ChatGPT, Gemini, etc., we'll start small, on a weekly basis, just by a raise of hands? Okay, great. How many use it on maybe 3 times a week basis? How many of you use it daily? Here's the problem we have ahead of us. So that's great. Thank you. I'm going a little bit on an audible here. Here's the problem. The people at the top of the house in the C-suite would not raise their hand. I think we can both vouch for that based on small sample sets. So use this for whatever grain of salt or sand you want. The point is, they are making decisions about these tools and not leveraging them in their everyday lives. I use it all day, every day, multiple times a day to make me more efficient. But yet we're making decisions on tens of millions and sometimes billions of dollars based on technology and innovation that we don't yet understand. And so therein lies the problem and the onus on the people in this room to educate and bring back and elevate the bar, because that's our job. And that's the only way we get the efficiencies that you're going to hear about.
All right. Joe called an audible, finished our entire interview, and offended half our members, but we're good. No.
That's what happens when you're independent. You can say whatever the hell you want.
All right. Let's recap this first question. We found a very conservative group. We found it partially because they've been burned before by false promises and poor implementations. We found it partially because they are currently post-COVID at razor thin margins, half of pre-COVID margins, and can't afford to make big mistakes. We found it partially because they're afraid of unions and they're afraid of medical staff revolts if we either threaten jobs or threaten autonomy and decision making. They're afraid of regulatory risk. They're afraid of all kinds of things. And, there's a lot there. But the point is, going out with, we're going to pursue the autonomous enterprise and we're looking for 30% gains is not the road we're going to go down. So we did take about 20 different health system processes, administrative and clinical, largely rooted in documentation. But we said, okay, let's identify in these processes, what are the areas that get us beyond the low impactability, low disruption, just do it kind of stuff, like let's give Copilot to our staff, or let's put, an ambient tool of your choice in our outpatient clinics. What are the ones that have high impactability, but again, not a lot of disruption, right? But they're worth doing, but people are just going to do it, right? And how do we get into that upper right quadrant of things that are bold moves? They're highly disruptive and they have high stakes for actually making a difference. Where would we embrace those? And which ones would we go through? And so for this, I'd like the three of us to each unpack one of our favorite examples that kind of made it forward and actually did receive the support of the group with some qualifications. And so I'll start. One of the ideas that came forward out of one of our workshops was the idea of an agentic autonomous AI quarterback. Okay. We've all seen patient flow assistance. You've seen, I'm not supposed to use names, but the Cuventus of the world with nudges to humans, right? And people get overwhelmed with nudges and then it gets improved and it's coming along. We've seen Lean Toss in the ORs. It's delivering a lot of value. We're seeing lots and lots and lots of different solutions, but I'm not talking about something like that. I'm talking about something that is truly ingesting the total census diagnosis history of the health system and its entry points, the emergency department, the transport system, transfers in from a command center or a transfer center, the OR, the cath lab, the office admissions, planned admissions, just all the ways in, and is continually reconfiguring priority lists, reconfiguring rounding lists, reconfiguring ancillary schedules, reconfiguring physical therapy rounds, access to the CT scanner, lab results, that's not waiting on the latent time that really is artificially waiting for the next rounding cycle every 12 or 24 hours. That's not waiting on a house supervisor to recognize that 3 of the 550 census need to be escalated right now and moved. That's not realizing that these telemetry patients don't need that status anymore. What if we had that type? How much latent capacity could be unlocked? Now, lots and lots of energy, lots and lots of promise, some skepticism as to whether that level of technology is ready for prime time yet, and that level of intelligence ready to be trusted yet. But that's something that got a lot of energy and I think will be visited going forward. Joe, why don't you go next?
Yeah, one of the themes we talked quite a bit about was around documentation for our clinicians in the room. Show a hand. Terrific. Thank you. How many people enjoy credentialing? No one. It's the most inefficient kind of documentation process we have. And yet we do it. Managed care companies do it. We all do it, right? Then you can get into the documentation within our patient care and coming from the bias of cardiac surgery. When a fresh open heart comes out of the operating room, there is the nurse who is standing there making sure that all of the critical things that the patient needs are attached and running, etc. And then there's literally another nurse who's just documenting typically, while certain numbers and other things are sort of called out. That, what would the value be if 2 nurses were doing that one thing, meaning getting that patient set up and so on, and all of that technology was just observing everything in that patient's room? And so, yeah, documentation leaves a lot to be desired within our 4 walls, as well as just from an educational standpoint as well.
And it was a bolder aspiration, right? It was a hospital with 0 documentation, not on pre-certs, not on intake, not on registration, not on consents, not on transfers, not on clinical, not on discharge, not, right?
Yeah. And I think back to the comments around the unions, and I spent 7 years as a chief people officer. We were 36% organized at Northwell, represented by labor of the 100,000 workforce. I can tell you with absolute certainty that is something we can all agree upon. Now, how we get there is a different conversation. Again, you'll hear more about that. But the beauty of what the documentation represents is that we all, I think, can agree that that's the moonshot. Imagine if you walked in and I'm actually looking at my patient and we're talking the same way as we used to be worried about the computer on wheels years ago and turning our back, etc. This changes not only the life and the role of the clinician, so we've put them at the center, but then it also changes the life and the position of the patient and the family and all those who are otherwise involved. So
that's great. Richard, the third example is a more clinical one. And why don't you unpack that one?
Yeah, I'd love to. And, I want to just take a bit of a step back because we've cast this group as a very conservative sort of stuck-up group. But I would like to say that they're also a very representative group, right? So these are organizations that some of them are building actually new buildings, whether it's ambulatory or inpatient, set up for zero documentation, right? But when it just comes down to today, do you see that concerted solution that can get you there? That's where they weren't quite there. Can you, within the next 3 to 5 years, say, we need to reduce our expense structure by 40%? They were not quite there. So, in those spaces, actually, I think we went into one of the groups talking about bed management, one of our favorite examples, right? That along with the access center, which just seems ripe for replace it with technology in the next 5 years. And the example that I heard back from one of the leaders in the group was, well, the worst thing we can do is get a lot of technology, invest all this money in it, and then have people just staring at screens, right? So that's typically what happens in some of the highly automated bed management centers. And just as we were about to pivot from that idea, this bright light of a new clinical idea came across, which was, what if you could take a nurse that has 2 years of experience and give them the insight, equip them with the information and the intuition that a 10-year working nurse has? What could that do? What could that do from a safety standpoint? What could that do from an experience or psychological safety standpoint for the nurse that's there in the middle of the night in an ICU and feels like they don't have the right level of support, they're understaffed, they don't have that leader that called in the same day, but they know what to do because they have the right information at their fingertips. They figured out the holy grail of medicine. Which one of these 5 patients is going to take, and what do I need? Which of these 5 patients do I need to pay more attention to, in what way, and who do I need to call at what time to be able to do this? Get the support that I need. And that really stuck with us in terms of thinking about what is the hardware solution and what are some of the software solutions that could help get us there. And I think it was Joe who actually took that all the way through and said, and what if we could now take that nurse with 10 years of experience and some of the sludge, so to say, that they feel and really get them energized like someone who's a new grad. So how do we really seed them with this information that restores joy in work and really allows them to provide highly reliable care 100% of the time? So that was a real winner for us and something that we've been talking about even since then.
So super compelling, given the retirement of our baby boomer workforce, given the need to upskill workforce so quickly, given the need to support our night and weekend workforce. I mean, just amazing. All of these were prioritized by the group, but they were sequenced. And drum roll, please, the group prioritized a hospital with zero documentation as the one they would like to sequence first. So again, not retrenching from the others. You may see those come through in future nexuses, but the one that was most ready for disruption, that was most ready for acceptance based on the successes we've just had with our ambulatory ambient listening work. And this is so much more than ambient listening. Okay, we'll go through that in a minute. But the idea that we could reduce that much documentation sludge in a hospital is the one that we prioritize to go first. So I'm going to unpack it a little bit, and we're going to turn this over to the tables. First is we promised we were going to be based in reality, and we said that the group didn't want to have some kind of 25%, 35% goal. So the numbers that Sonia shared of a $2 billion health system, which usually has 10 to 15,000 FTE, being able to eliminate and unlock 250 FTE of documentation sludge, it's only 3 to 5%. Okay. So it's not a moonshot type of a number. And in each of these pockets of documentation, administrative documentation and clinical documentation, there's so much to go after. It seems really, really doable. And in the aggregate, 100 million hours. If only the AVIA members pre-Panda, were to commit, all of them, we could contribute 40 million of the 100 million hours that we're challenging the industry to take out nationally. So let me just ask really quickly, Richa, and I'll point you to our clocks. We're going to have to be a little bit faster on this one. But Richa, why does this energize you? And then Joe, I'm going to ask you why it energizes you.
So why it energizes me is when Sonia and Clay talked about sludge, I could truly envision it. And it took me back, for some of you that are probably scratching your head and thinking about, have I heard this before? It took me back to an IHI collaborative from many years ago. And I think it was called something similar. I see people nodding their heads. And we did waste walks. And, there was an initiative of getting rid of silly stuff. I think it was called something other than silly, actually. And, we went down this path. And at that point, things were different. The level of technology adoption within healthcare and personally was at a very different place. This was about 10 plus years ago. We've come a long way. What your organizations are deploying now gives us a line of sight to be able to show this. Ambient listening now, while this is not just about ambient listening, is table stakes, right? So that already gives a level of lift that we should be able to capture at scale and demand at scale, really, to be able to return that joy to work and that time to clinical time. So I think just in terms of what we've deployed and the lift we've seen and what we should be able to demand of partner solutions gives me energy that this time we could actually do it.
Yeah, the only other I would add to that is one word, easy to say, hard to effectuate, and that's impact. In fact, most people, when they interview and talk about why they want to be in healthcare, they talk about the impact and how it has occurred for them in their life or their family's lives. This checks the boxes, if you will. If you think about quality, check the box. Spending more time with my patient, I'm not sort of getting encumbered by this other stuff. If you think about ROI, okay, sure, we can get into the argument of cost mitigation versus cost savings. The organization will get the benefit, the uptick of the additional documentation, and then thereby coding, you go down the rest of the revenue cycle path. Check the box on patient ownership. You can capture information you haven't captured before in the interest of educating them. We can sort of go on and on. We don't have that much time. The point is, this really sort of attacks right down to our workforce, giving them back the energy and the pride that they had when they were at year 2 and aiming to get back at year 10. I think that's one of the most exciting things about being able to operate in this age that we're in.
So last comment before we turn this over for some table discussions. MD Anderson's in the room today. There you are. Dan coined a phrase during our site visit that I just found so inspiring when he said, the environment will become a silent partner in your care. And to me, this is so much more than ambient listening. This isn't just passive listening, putting documentation in a discrete field. That's amazing in and of itself. But this is context-aware agents in the background, knowing the best action to take based on what's being happened, and populating forward checklists, taking forward handoffs to other agents, to activating other processes, to submitting or closing out other orders. This is something far beyond just what we've done in our ambulatory clinics and sometimes in acute settings with ambient listening. This is attacking documentation in the hospital, administrative, clinical, as much as we can. Now, we're saying the hospital is zero documentation. We're admitting there's going to be required documentation. We're only getting to maybe 3 to 5% of the total FTE use. but we think it's enough to move the needle. We think it's enough to galvanize support. And we think it's not too much to, get the eye roll that doesn't pass the believability test.